This week, our sponsored interviewee, welcome Mike Ahmadi, the Global Director of IoT Security Solutions at DigiCert. In the technical segment, Apollo Clark will be here in studio talking to us about threat hunting in the cloud. In the security news, the Senate can't protect senators' staff from cyber attacks. Equifax fined by ICO over data breach that hit Britain's, is that a crypto? Yeah, Britain's U.S. military given the power to hack back and defend forward. And Amazon Basics Microwave works with Alexa. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/PSW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter. Introducing the new DigiCert. As the leading provider of high-assurance SSL, TLS, and PKI certificates, DigiCert is all about improving security across the web and IoT. DigiCert is committed to helping customers and partners successfully deploy identity, authentication, and encryption solutions. They'll even help you figure out which certificate you need to secure your web domains, apps, devices, and more. Check out the Cert Wizard tool under the SSL tab on digicert.com.
And welcome to the show. But first, let me introduce you to a man who has a really awesome job. So let's give him a hand, Mr. Astorian.
Well, welcome everyone to Paul's Security Weekly. Thank you, Larry. This is episode 576, recorded September 20th, 2018. And of course, G-Unit Studios here in Rhode Island. I'd like to welcome my illustrious co-host here in studio, Mr. Larry Pesce.
Yay!
What's going on, dude? How are you?
Oh, it's been a long week. And it's about to get two more long weeks.
Oh, yeah, you've got some travel coming up, huh?
Two weeks of back-to-back travel.
Where are you going?
A week home.
You're
and
teaching
then
in Orlando, right?
Vacation. Teaching in Vegas for SANS.
You're going back
next
to Vegas.
Week. Going back to Vegas.
Back to Vegas.
Vegas.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't think so. Yeah, I leave Friday for Vegas. I'll be there 9 days. Yeah, 9 days.
Another 9 days in Vegas.
9 days in Vegas. I'm home one day, and then I leave to go to DerbyCon. Because we have
DerbyCon?
We have 4 days of company meetings before DerbyCon.
That's right. I was like, wow, I got to get working on my slides a little.
Yeah.
I got more time. Well, I still have to work on my slides.
Yep.
On the lines via Zoom or Skype, Mr. Jack Daniel is here with us.
Hello.
What's going on, Jack?
You? I hate Skype. That's all.
How
are you?
I'm good. You know, I'm only here for the interview portion, and I gotta go to my son's school.
So drink up.
Open house. So I'm gonna have about 8 whiskey neats before I go.
Yeah, I remember those days. Yeah, talking about kids. You know what's fun? When you're my age and date, you don't have to meet the parents; you have to meet the kids. So next weekend will be interesting.
Mr. Jason Wood is here with us. Jason, welcome.
Hey, greetings, everybody. How
Broadcasting live from the massage parlor. Very nice.
That's right.
Every
week.
Every week.
Sometimes
it's not.
What?
Sometimes it's his office in the background, and sometimes he's having a massage.
Sometimes I drop the background because I don't feel like messing with it.
Yeah. That's a pretty honest answer to that, Jason.
Is it like messy back there or something, or?
No, it's not.
So behind me you get to see
the stacks of towels.
Soldering irons.
Soldering iron.
Very
whatever.
nice.
Gotcha.
Quick announcement. Join us for our webcast with Logarithm. I'm going to be presenting tips and tricks for defending the enterprise using open source tools. The webcast will be held on September 27th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Make sure you register now That was in caps, so that's why I said now. At securityweekly.com/logarithm. Reading this announcement too.
Oh, hey, I have a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can we get you a new headshot?
Why? What?
Because like the one that was.
Go back to it. Oh my God, that's
15
ancient.
years. That's like 15 years old.
It is.
You had hair.
I did have hair. Yeah, that was probably right after I got married. Yeah.
That might have been before.
Might have been before.
Might have been before.
No, it was after because that was in the new house.
Yes, it was in the new. Yes, you're right. It was in the new house because we had that backdrop hung up on the curtain rod.
We did
in front of the sliding glass door.
I remember that.
And we had to take the
vividly.
pictures across the pool table.
Yes. Yes.
Yep.
And we had martial arts weapons and stuff. That was fun.
Yep.
DerbyCon is holding its first ever mental health and wellness workshop. Go to derbycon.com/wellness. I would like to now welcome our special guest. Mike is here with us. Mike Ahmadi from DigiCert. Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am fantastic. I am excited to talk about various topics. We're going to talk a little bit about IoT. We're going to talk, I think, a lot, Mike, about the automotive industry, which is interesting. We have Jack Daniel here who used to work in the automotive industry, although not in the security capacity, although I'm sure he fixed a few seatbelts in his time.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
well,
Mike,
hey, you know, we're dealing with safety issues in security right now in automotive, so it's good.
So, Mike, how did you get your start in information security?
Oh God, I was a CIO of a company, and we were getting hacked, and we got hacked by some clever people in Korea, and I figured out the way they were doing it. And I said, this is the most fascinating thing I've ever seen. And I was back about the year 2001. I said, I think I want to learn more about this. And one thing led to another, and here I am today. So
and
that's
Mike,
pretty much how it started.
Sure, that's awesome. Yeah, a lot of people's stories, Mike, start with we got hacked, and then I was fascinated with it. So we can check that box. Yeah. As the global director of IoT solutions, what do you do for DigiCert today?
Well, so I have two titles, that's one of them. The other one is VP of Transportation Security. My big focus right now is really transportation security, but I really assist in sort of any kind of critical infrastructure, whether it's industrial, medical, anything else. But essentially, I go out there and I get involved in standards and work with the various organizations that are looking to secure their environments. And I try to determine exactly what is the proper fit for what we offer at DigiCert. We don't just like go up to people and say, yeah, here's our catalog and buy something. We try to figure out exactly what the need is, what they're trying to secure, and build a very specific custom solution in many cases for IoT these days.
Yeah, it's interesting, Mike. We were talking earlier, and we're talking about the difference between a producer and a consumer of IoT devices who may also need digital certificates to secure that environment, and how some organizations are really both. Could you kind of elaborate and kind of set the landscape?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at let's take an automotive company, right? You got an enterprise side, which is like the back end, everything that works within the office environment. Their websites, the way they communicate, securely with email, internal structures, etc., with vendors, and then of course, you have the vehicle side, right? And so they're a consumer, right? So they need the SSL stuff and the TLS certificates in order to manage their enterprise, but they also need authentication and certificates to secure the vehicles which they sell to the public. Same holds true for even a healthcare delivery organization. They consume for their back end, but at the same time, they may also have devices that they either create or implement when they need security on them.
And on the enterprise side, kind of on the back end, that I think we as an industry used to look at, oh my God, we got to roll out PKI, and a lot of organizations did it because it was such a nightmare. I think we've come kind of full circle on that, and that on the enterprise side, it's fairly easy to implement a PKI in a digital certificate system.
Yeah, the enterprise side is kind of locked down. It's cookie cutter, really. Weird things happen once in a while that just sort of throw a wrench in the monkey works. Like I worked for Codenomicon when we discovered Heartbleed, and that really kind of like upset the balance for a while. But for the most part, people were able to resolve it, and it showed that PKI at the enterprise level does work for the most part in dealing with those issues. The IoT side is a lot more complicated today because no one has really determined what the sort of the way to do it is yet. Everybody's kind of like coming up with a lot of different ideas. Many of them are actually quite good, but no one's really settled on anything. So again, it gets much more complicated when you're looking at IoT because it's all over the board. And the other main difference is that on the enterprise side, the cost of failure is not usually death, right?
Yeah.
There's potential for death on the IoT side, and so the impact changes. So the way you view failure and failure modes changes considerably when you consider that. You can't just simply reboot a system in many cases and hope to recover from it. So it's much more challenging and much more interesting, let's say.
And Mike, can you explain to our listeners like the different use cases in the IoT side? If I have manufacturing and selling an IoT device, am I using digital certificates to validate my code, validate my software, validate my firmware updates, and also for management? Like what does that look like logistically?
The answer to that, it can be any and all of those, right? So you're validating your code. You're validating that, for example, a part that you're installing into a system is authentic in many cases. You're validating a communication path. You're validating that the over-the-air update is actually legitimate through something like code signing. And it was very interesting. A few years ago when I started talking about PKI a decade ago, nobody even really knew what it was on the device side, right? They said, what are you talking about? And we don't really care about authentication. That's not the case anymore. Now what we're dealing with is a lot of people understand it, but they're trying to wrap their heads around it, how to do it effectively and cost effectively. And in many cases, we show people it's not as simple as really just buying a cert all the time, right? You really have to understand that where the failure happens oftentimes in PKI is in the implementation and the management of it and the ongoing things that actually can occur over time. So, for example, one of the things people have to pay attention to, we just announced a partnership with Isara and Gemalto to start implementing quantum-resistant keys into systems. And the reason we say this, and we're trying to push it into places like automotive, is you're going to issue keys and certificates using current algorithms, but in 10 years, quantum computing is going to break those. You should really start considering using quantum-resistant technology today because a car is usually made to last more than 10 years, right? So
and
10 years
Mike,
down the line...
How are they able to determine how resistant to, quantum-based attacks those certificates are? Because we still don't really have quantum computing yet, right? The computers to run it.
Well, yeah. There's certain things they understand, and again, I'm not very technical on that aspect, but the way it's explained to me is there's certain things they understand about the way quantum computing is meant to work, and what they do is they look at different, and they sort of like posit different ways that that things can break, and then they try to build keys which essentially overcome what they think is going to be the solution. But the good news is that when you have a lot of smart people working on it, if they're working on building a solution as quantum computing is growing, the idea is hopefully by the time quantum computing goes live throughout the world, they'll be ready for it, right? So, they look at things like, based upon what we understand the way it works, we don't believe that this type of attack would be possible with these keys, and here's how we show it mathematically, and then they move forth.
A really gross oversimplification is there's some math problems that are solved in quantum computing. basically a lot of older crypto and current crypto based on older ideas is based on using prime numbers and factoring results of use of primes, huge primes. And quantum computing promises to make that an instant thing instead of being a lot of near instant, rather than taking a lot of time. So there are other algorithms that don't rely on just the difficulty of messing with really honking big numbers. Gross oversimplification, but that's sort of the basics. And the things that don't rely on that are not as likely to fall quickly.
I could have said it better by yourself. Maybe you should apply for a job at DigiCert. That's awesome. You know.
That actually might be a pretty good home for you someday, Jack.
The home for me has to have a rocking chair on the porch. Oh wait, that's where
I literally am sitting in my rocking chair in front of my wood-burning stove right now, so I totally get what you're talking about.
No wood-burning stove here. It's still in the 90s every day with 80% humidity, so it's a little sticky.
Yikes.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm not actually I don't actually have a fire yet. Yeah, it's still in the 90s here, near Yosemite.
So, Mike, I want to go back when we were talking about a company that's managing devices, right? And when we look at the automotive industry, like, what do those numbers look like in terms of the number of endpoints? And you were providing me some numbers that were pretty astonishing.
Oh, God, it's ridiculous. I just did some simple mathematical numbers. Just looked at the number, based upon the number of cars that are produced in the U.S. per year. Within a 3-year period, I think I came up with a number like 75 billion endpoints that the automotive industry would have to manage. It's a significant leap when you think about it. So I don't know how much you know about like V2V and V2X, but the whole idea is that these driverless vehicles that are planned for the future would be communicating by exchanging certificates, and in many cases, thousands of times per hour, right? I mean, it's every second, because they're constantly communicating securely to everything around it, and they all have to be managed. And so when you look at those numbers, you look at an automotive manufacturer today, and they're issuing certificates on the order of a few million maybe for what they're currently using PKI for, and it's very limited. But now we're talking about going into the billions. And one of the things that I bring up to them is I know you're comfortable with managing a few million, and maybe you can double that to a few more million, but can you really scale to a billion and then eventually 75 billion or more, considering how long your cars are going to be on the road, right? And when I ask that question sometimes, I get a lot of blank stares, or some people say, yeah, we're not really sure we know how to do that. But they do care. They're concerned and they're listening, which is good, right? But again, the rollout of PKI and digital authentication in automotive will be the largest rollout in history, because you have to look at a car as being a rolling cell phone and computer network that's careening down the road at 60 miles an hour. And by the way, it's not expected to be replaced every 2 years. It's expected to be replaced every 15 years. So these are all things that we have not really figured out in the computing world yet. Where you get a new iPhone every year or desktop every couple of years, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting, like how many, even if you think about 15 years, I mean, there's a lot of cars that stay on the road longer than that, and they just keep getting passed and may go to different countries or whatever, so.
And you forget the collectible stuff and that people just like.
Oh, God, same conversation I've had. I got a 77 Corvette. Thank God it's not connected to anything, right?
Yeah.
But, if you buy a new Corvette today, which is one of the most gorgeous cars I've ever seen, you're going to want to hang on to that $100,000 investment for 30 years, right?
Yeah. Or longer.
And then the question becomes, how long is that car expected to be secure? And
Right.
by the way, what do we know about security today, and what are we going to know about security 30 years from now?
Heck, I'd even argue the life cycle for developing systems that go in those cars and the protocols that are being used at the time they're being developed, the lead time even before it makes it to market. We learn so much that it may be vulnerable the day it gets rolled off.
Exactly. But the good news is we're working with the automotive industry. I chair an SAE task force on trusted authentication. I just came back from a Department of Transportation 2-day meeting discussing governance of this. And let me tell you with certainty, the government cares and the automotive manufacturers care.
Now,
right?
Mike, is that
I think do
all automotive manufacturers care equally, or there are some that maybe don't attend the meetings?
It's hard to say how much everyone cares equally. It's hard to paint everyone with a brushstroke. I would have to say all the big makers are there. There's a few that are missing. Some of the newer players are sometimes not as present as we would like them to be. We certainly welcome an opportunity to work with anybody, but again, I would say that the very minimum that the big three in the U.S. as well as some of the bigger players, like Toyota and Honda and the big players out in Japan, and of course Volkswagen, et cetera, the ones that comprise about 98% of automotive manufacturing globally, definitely are involved and definitely care and are definitely working to collaborate right now.
Oh, that's good.
I think part of that is because the Miller-Valasek hack woke everybody up because it led to the first and only recall of anything ever in the history, just purely for security. Never happened before or since.
That was Volkswagen, right?
No, that was Fiat Chrysler.
Chrysler, okay.
And I will tell you, Fiat Chrysler is definitely one of the big leaders right now in moving forward with initiatives, right? They're very open to a lot of different ways of looking at things, and it's really... that's what happens, right? In many cases, is the guys that take the battles, that take the punches, are usually the ones that end up, moving forward the quickest, right?
But now, what's interesting,
but everybody else is definitely following suit.
In a recall today, you likely have a user that you can, or a person that you can reach out to, conceivably. When we get to autonomous vehicles, that changes. I think two things change. The risk changes. I think it's a higher degree of risk that we have to, prevent bad things from happening. But also, like, there's no person to say, "Oh, I need to take my car to the dealership," right? And how do we deal with that situation?
Well, yeah, it's very interesting. In the autonomous vehicle environment, the owner of the car is the corporation, right? Which, of course, the Supreme Court has determined is a person, right? So the question then becomes, okay, then so who's responsible for it, right? And how does that work? Who's liable? I mean, the autonomous vehicles are going to be really managed by fleets, right? You're not going to buy an autonomous vehicle for yourself, right? So that becomes the person or the entity that's in charge of dealing with that. And then, of course, the government, Department of Transportation, is extremely concerned with safety. They want to make sure that we don't have any situations. And there's all kinds of interesting, complicating things that come up. Like, for example, emergency vehicles, right? You're going to have some sort of a way of coding an emergency vehicle so that when it's going down the highway, the autonomous vehicles realize that it's an emergency vehicle. How do you make sure that happens, and then how do you make sure that somebody can't spoof that, right?
Right, because that's our first thought. Like, I want to get to work fast, so I'm going to spoof an emergency vehicle and get to work really fast.
Right, there's a song about that, right? Move, bitch, get out my way.
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody's going to come up with a hack like that and sell it on the internet, right? It's like, yeah, I'll give you the maximum express lane pass, right?
Yep.
I'll just get them all to pull over. Or if there's a big attack, if there's a big worm which causes a huge number of vehicles, like, we're talking vehicles in the millions, you could set them more like, say, okay, go to a safe state, park when you're done or move over to the shoulder. But then what happens when there's a million vehicles on the shoulder that are not moving, right? And by the way, do we have enough shoulder for a million vehicles?
Right.
And, there's a lot of unanswered questions, and it's interesting because the Department of Transportation and the automotive industry is thinking that this is all going to be rolled out by 2023, right? That's not very long.
No, certainly not.
Right? So there's a lot of authentication issues that we're bringing up that we need to answer. And as the largest provider of digital certificate services and authentication with the most experience, really, we bring these things up and say, well, have you thought of this, and have you thought of this, and have you thought of this, and have you actually secured 1 billion endpoints, right? And the answer is usually, well, no. I'm like, well, you really need to consider this and before you move forward, because
how many organizations have revoked over 1 million certs, right? Which conceivably could need to be done, right? In this use case.
It conceivably, yes, could be. There are some people that claim that they think that revocation is not going to be needed, and I scratch my head, right? Very politely, I say, okay, well, that's an interesting opinion, right? And there's some people that say, well, we could handle it without PKI. I'm like, okay, well, what do you got, And well, we got this new idea. I'm like, has it been vetted for 30 years, right? PKI, when properly implemented, is 99.99% effective at doing what it does, right? So the question becomes, do you have something that you really are willing to entrust safety to, based upon what you know about this new idea? We're open to it, but how have you vetted it?
Right. Yeah, because in cases today, and I think I brought up the example with Tesla, where they had a issue with their key fob. I'm not sure if it was digital certificate related, but someone discovered a vulnerability and created an exploit for their key fob.
We had that in the show last week.
Yeah, and so, but the way I read that was, you had to get issued a new key fob. If you wanted to be more secure.
No, even better, you had to pay for the privilege of having a new key fob.
Ew, so you have to pay for a more secure key fob.
And you could choose not to.
They can update the car remotely, but not the key fob.
Correct.
And that's kind of an interesting problem, Mike.
Yeah, and that gets into the question of who's really responsible at that point and for how long, right? There's two things I bring up. One is, okay, can I get in and out of my car without a key fob? The answer is probably, okay? So therefore, okay, maybe they make that argument. You want a new secure key fob, go buy it. And if it's out of the warranty, then whatever. But if the issue actually means that there's a safety issue involved, okay, that might be a different question. But then there's another question I ask and I bring up, and I brought this up to the Department of Transportation. I said, how long is an automotive company expected to be responsible for the security of a vehicle, right? So, for example, it seems reasonable that my car has to meet emission standards during the warranty period, right? After that, if I want to drive, it's on me to get it smogged, right? Not the automotive company's problem anymore, okay? So then the question becomes, could that potentially also hold true for security? And at some point, does the responsibility of driving a vehicle security fall on the consumer, or maybe, for example, in the case of autonomous vehicles, the fleet owner, right? You say, look, is it reasonable, and this is an interesting question, for you to require automotive manufacturers to make sure the car that it sells is secure for 50 years? I have a 41-year-old Corvette, right? Let's say it was built today. Is it reasonable for me to go back to Chevy and say, hey, you know what? You got to make sure that this thing remains secure, And that's an interesting question, right?
Yeah, well, and it's interesting too, how that relates to healthcare. Let's say, hospital purchases IV pumps. How long are we going to hold that manufacturer responsible for the security updates on those IV pumps?
Exactly. But see, here's the problem, right? You're talking about security problems are non-functional in nature, right? It's a misuse case.
Right.
The use case is the functional nature of the thing still operates. So then the question becomes, do I scrap my IV pump because it's no longer secure? Then they say, well, just remove it from the network. But it's not designed to be used outside of a network. See, we've gotten rid of half of our staff and replaced it with wireless connectivity because that's what this offers us to do, right? Yep. So are we prepared to actually go back to the old way of doing things?
No.
You see? It's an interesting time we live in.
For sure. More questions for Mike? Larry?
I have done.
Jack? Jack, you used to work in the automotive industry. Do you ever want to go back there?
No. No. My take on the auto industry is that the auto industry, both retail and at the manufacturer level, has a terrible reputation, and it's way better than they deserve.
Well, I mean, when I started working with the automotive industry and security, I kind of had a little bit of a mindset, but I soon came to realize that they actually, and this is what matters to me, they actually do care about security. They are open to ideas, right? They don't want things to go wrong, right? And they seem to be working, moving forward with things. The way I look at it and why I joined DigiCert is one is years ago no one cared about PKI, but in the last few years people started, and I actually started in PKI, but now all of a sudden people seem to care about it, so they're open to a discussion. And all I'm looking for is we're just interested in helping organizations build safer and more secure things. However we can. I mean, obviously we're a for-profit company and certainly want to make money doing it, but at the same time, and this probably holds true for anybody here that's involved in security, it's also kind of a pleasing thing to be able to solve a funny problem like this, right? I would like to be able to answer some of those questions that I posed, right? How can we actually wrap our head around this problem and end up with safe and secure vehicles, going into the future? And I think there's an answer, right? And I do think working with an organization like I do is going to help us find those answers.
Yeah, for specific problems, it's true. But 27 plus years of dealing with the auto industry, it's a myopia that's unbelievable. And we're talking about people who put a low-dollar bid on human life every day before they wake up, and you're a rounding error when it comes to safety and security. And the progress that's being made is great, but I've seen just too much of the inside in my almost 30 years in that industry, and never want to look back. I sometimes feel guilty for not getting involved with I Am the Cavalry and some of the other projects working with the auto industry, but I've just got too much scar tissue towards that entire industry to get involved.
Where exactly is that?
I totally get where you're coming from.
Where exactly is that scar tissue?
But, I will say that fortunately for me, I haven't built those scars. So, and my experience so far has been good. But who knows? That could change.
Mike,
so far they seem to be receptive.
Mike, when you sit on some of these meetings, what's your assessment of the level of priority of some of the safety issues versus some of the issues we may have with theft? How do they balance those two? Obviously safety is more important, but what's it like when you start talking about theft?
So in specific, the groups that I'm most heavily involved in, and there's different security efforts, are definitely concerned with safety. Okay, so the DOT, who's deeply involved in some the people working directly for the DOT actually attend some of my SAE meetings. And work within the standards organizations right now. They are purely concerned with safety. That's it. I mean, they just want to make sure that these things are safe on the road. And again, for example, many of the people in my working groups are actually not security people; they're safety engineers, right? And this is a new thing for them. And it's hard for them to wrap their head around it because, again, in the traditional world of safety, there's a certain, when you're looking at things like mechanics or a piece of glass or metal or a door, there's a certain way that it acts, and it doesn't change the way it acts over time. Or if it does, they know exactly how it's going to change. It's going to rust, it's going to get old, etc. When you're looking at security, it's extremely dynamic, right? How something fails in the world of security is a complete unknown. It's an infinite space problem, right? So you now have a bunch of safety engineers trying to wrap their heads around infinity. And all we're trying to do is try to shrink infinity down to a manageable size for them.
Yeah, and that's been a particularly interesting problem with IoT devices in general. think it was Mike Murray that came on the show years ago and gave the example of a scalpel, right? When you set out to design a scalpel, you design it for how people are using it, right? You design it not to break when they use it. But what you don't consider is, what if someone picks up that scalpel and starts stabbing people? Like, how do you design? How do you think about and have that much imagination to think about how people might use a scalpel? Or, like you're saying, Mike, how are attackers going to use their imagination to, pull off what might be the next attack that might attack technology that hasn't been developed yet?
Right, and then you get into conversations where people are trying to determine how much security to put into something based upon the risk, because they look at it within a certain environment, right? But I always say, when you connect something to the network the network is the device, right? So let me give you a great example I gave, is that there was a casino, you guys may remember about a year ago, a casino got hacked through the aquarium thermometer, right?
I think I remember that story.
They had an internet-connected aquarium thermometer, and it was able to tunnel its way into the casino network and get into the high roller database, and apparently they were able to do all kinds of serious misdeeds. But when you design a thermometer, how much security are you going to think you need to put into it, right? And when you buy a thermometer for your network-connected thermometer, what assumptions does the consumer make, right? Casinos care a lot about security, but do they always really assume that a thermometer is going to be a way to get into their network, right? So then the question becomes, is there a minimum level of security for IoT that we all have to drive towards? My argument is, at the very minimum, let's start with basic strong authentication, right? You look at things like non-repudiation, strong authentication, use PKI where you can, doesn't necessarily have to be costly, and maybe that'll solve, maybe that'll help you with the 80-20 rule, somebody will go say, you know what, I don't really want to hack this because I have to authenticate to it. I'll go on to the next thing that doesn't have strong authentication.
Yeah,
right?
Mike,
if you look at most IoT devices,
I agree with that. I think that the issues we've seen with everything from automobiles and all of these IoT devices, right, the major concern is, how do we authenticate to them? And I think that process has been abused more often. I mean, if we look at the worms that are running around, they're basically preying upon weak authentication in some form or fashion. I think the second thing is the integrity of the software and potentially the hardware, right, that's on that device. How do I validate that when I do a firmware update that it's actually the firmware update and no one else has corrupted that or poisoned that firmware update in validating those updates? And I think those are two great use cases for PKI. And I know that's what DigiCert does, right? But that certainly plays into it.
It absolutely does play into it. And again, in situations where we're talking to companies that have actually fallen prey to those exact attacks that you're talking about, they're all about figuring out how to code sign, and they're all about figuring out how to authenticate. They're very open, right? We still live in a very reactive world, okay? What we're trying to do is we're trying to proactively convince organizations that they need to move forward. But unfortunately, security, and especially PKI in many cases, is sort of like rain on the festival of ingenuity, right? You're coming in, you're saying, hey, we're talking some cool technology, and you're talking about something that doesn't add any feature to us and costs us money. Now, that I will say, though, one thing is for sure, that's changing. We're talking to organizations now. We had a startup electric automotive company contact us and said, we haven't built anything yet, but we've decided that we're going to build PKI in from the beginning. Can you help us? And, wow, yes, of course we can, right? And so we're starting to see that happen, I think in part because people are seeing more and more attacks, right? Black Hat is always very interesting, right? More shows like yours, right? And people are starting to have to pay for their faults in the world of security. So I think it's getting better. The question becomes: is it getting better fast enough?
Yeah.
Right.
No, I agree. And Microsoft is bringing forth their concept of Azure Sphere. We had Galen Hunt on talking about it, and it very much builds on. This interview actually builds on that one because Microsoft laid out it has a fantastic framework that addresses the issues that we're talking about, but it also relies, Mike, very heavily on PKI to implement that, right? So you do need a good framework along with the actual nuts and bolts to make that work and validate all of these things.
Right, and the thing that I always tell organizations about PKI is, because we work with a lot of organizations that try to do a lot of it in-house, and I say this, and I try to say it without sounding self-serving, say, understand that PKI can be a really complicated thing to implement and manage over time as your environment scales. And I say, you're an automotive manufacturer, or you're a person that makes widgets, and that's what you do for a living. You're not a PKI management company, right? So it doesn't make sense for you to take your team of 10 and grow it to a team of 100 when you could use an organization that specializes in it, like DigiCert, right, to do that for you, which is kind of like what the Internet does, right? We don't have to really worry about it. We'll just get our certs and deal with the public certs and let DigiCert manage the CA and manage the keys and manage the certificates and the revocations, et cetera, and so on and so forth. And we'll continue to do e-commerce. 94% of the e-commerce websites globally use our products just so they can keep going, and it works. So, that's the whole thing is, organizations have to understand that they have to understand what their limitations are and when is it really best to focus on what you do best and let people who live and breathe it really step in and help you. That's our big argument.
Yeah, it's almost like when we talk about people that are creating their own crypto algorithms.
That's never a good idea.
Don't do that. Don't.
Or your own authentication schemes.
Yeah. Oh, I've seen it happen. It was like, oh, really?
I've seen your own authentication schemes with your own crypto.
But when we go down to the IoT, what we've observed, you and I personally, Larry, is like, they wrote their own web server. I mean, maybe not them, but like their subsidiary wrote their own web server.
Yep.
And now that's being used in all of these products. Like, why would you? I mean, I understand why, because you got to fit in a small device, but that's where I like, outsourcing your PKI infrastructure and using the Microsoft Azure Sphere framework, right? Let's use something that engineers have put a lot of time and thought and effort into so that we don't have to develop ourselves and we can focus on the features of the product. I think it's also a good business decision.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. The point I'm making. I tell the automotive manufacturers, like, you guys, Henry Ford, when he started, decided early on that it didn't make sense for him to make wheels and axles and smelt his own steel, right? His idea was design cars and assemble them, right? And if you talk to a car manufacturer today, they'll say, we do a lot of metal folding and everything else comes from a supplier. And I say, well, something as critical as PKI probably should as well.
Right. Yeah, that's a good analogy. Yeah.
Treat it as a supply chain issue, right? And then, continue to build cooler and more interesting cars,
Well,
let us help you with the safety.
And to speak to that too, in the challenges of PKI, was it Symantec had to revoke some certs? What was the story there, Mike? And I think DigiCert helped with this process, right?
Well, yeah, it's really hard for me to really sort of wrap my head around it, but they ran into some issues, and DigiCert basically was called in to help with the situation, and at that point it seemed prudent for mutual decision between DigiCert and Symantec that everything sort of be moved over to the DigiCert CAs and servers. So DigiCert is now, been working with all of the organizations that were affected and reissuing them DigiCert the certificates and working through the issues related to that. Hiccups happen, right? Thankfully DigiCert was there to resolve the issue, and we continue to help them through it. But I will say this, because we had a lot of the Symantec team join us. They're all pretty sharp, right? There's definitely a lot of sharp people on that team, and issues happen, and we fix them, right? And the good news is that we were able to fix it, right? And then and move on from there.
Awesome. Anything else you want to share with our audience today, Mike?
I guess I would have to say, the big thing now is, as I mentioned earlier, we've announced the partnership with Gemalto, so we're looking to move forward into, offering a better and expanded services. We're definitely in a very good growth phase right now. We have a very nice, sharp IoT team that is now working directly with multiple industries: medical, financial, healthcare, industrial, in helping them secure all their devices. And obviously, if anyone is interested in knowing more about us, they could certainly contact us, and we're more than willing to help with any IoT issue. We've got the most experience, and we're ready to share it with everybody.
Awesome. Mike, I just have 5 questions left for you. We call these the 5 questions with Security Weekly. Are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
All right.
There's no right or wrong answer, so if that helps alleviate any anxiety.
Except for the ones that are right and the ones that are wrong.
No,
I'm kidding.
All right, Mike. 3 words to describe yourself.
Oh, gosh. I would have to say curious, persistent, and let's say obstinate.
Correct.
Mike, if you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Serial killer? What would be my weapon of choice?
Yes.
Oh, gosh.
That's a good one.
God, I don't even know. I guess an icicle, because I could leave no evidence after a while, right?
Very nice. That's a very popular answer, yes. Mike, if you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
I wish I had known this back then.
Mike, in the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
In a popular game of what?
It's called Ask Grabby Grabby. It's popular in Europe.
Oh, okay. Do I prefer to go first or second in
Yes.
a popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby?
Yes. It's the easiest question, Mike, because it's multiple choice.
Yeah. So what does my opponent look like?
That depends if you're playing in the U.S. or Europe. There's different rules and different players in each of the leagues.
I need more information. Sorry. It could be first or second, really. It just depends. Maybe it also depends on if I've had a few drinks or something.
There you go.
That is a brilliant answer, sir.
I like that answer. Mike, choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Celebrities?
Celebrities.
Or famous
be my
people.
Parents. Famous people to be my parents. Well, let's see. I suppose Jesus Christ would probably be a good one for a dad because, hey, he's the Son of God, and B, he could probably turn water into wine and make
It's handy.
loaves
It's
into
handy,
dishes or whatever.
especially after liquor stores are closed.
Yeah, that'd be one. And for a mother, I don't know. That's hard to say.
Mom's
I would
the
have
tough
to
one.
say maybe
For men.
maybe Helen Keller, just because
Wow.
it seems like she would be interesting. So
That is
it's hard to say.
arguably the most unique couple we've ever
Yes.
had on the show.
Jesus
Yes.
Christ and Helen Keller, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you imagine an argument between those two?
Oh man, Jesus Christ. Sorry, I had to.
I think I'm a little warped. I just like to see it, Like watch this, Mom and Dad are arguing.
It's awesome. I like the imagination that went into those answers.
That's
Mike. It's
that's
awesome.
awesome.
Thank you. Mike, thank you so much for
Hope
appearing on.
Hope Dad doesn't choose to strike her dad, I mean, he
That's
could
right.
do that, right?
Oh, Mike, thank you so much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation, and you guys have a good time wherever you're going.
Awesome. And with that,
All
we
right.
will take a short break, come back with our technical segment, so stay tuned.